Getting the engine started, kick-started was an art.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the whole joy of Enfield was the dhak, 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 dhak sound of the bullet, and it would meld into the tabla.
The whole campaign was around Bullet Meri Jaan.
Okay. I bought the first RD350. There were just two colors, red and blue.
And the actual user of the RD350 was the enthusiast. Hello and welcome to Car and Bike. We have a very special guest, Manoj Berry, who calls himself an accountant turned brand expert, but he's a motorcyclist at heart. And we'll talk about a lot of Manoj's stories from the 80s onwards and even before that actually, and his experience with motorcycles and iconic brands in Indian motorcycle history like the Yamaha RD350, the Yamaha RX100 and the Yamaha YZF R15. So Manoj, thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
And
great to be with another biker.
Likewise. So let's talk about your story first.
Okay.
When did you first get on a motorcycle?
My uncle was a dentist and his assistant used to have not a moped, a thing called Vicky.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, Victoria in Germany. So on the pretext of getting his tires filled and all, I used to whack his Vicky and go around. It's pretty short. So that's how it began. And then later my dad had a Rajdoot.
Right.
The original Polish ones, 3 gears.
Yeah.
And signature Earl's type swinging arm suspension.
Right.
So that's why I always feel that was the first ADV. Because that suspension could handle no roads.
Anything.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it was quite popular, especially with villagers, and its key purpose was the doodwala. They used to deliver milk, and that bike could carry, it wasn't fast, not at all, 3 gears, but it could carry a hell of a lot of load.
And could take on rough roads, roads.
It was a poor man's truck.
Yeah. I remember because my father used to own a Rajdoot in the late 70s, early 80s in fact, and he was a doctor posted in the villages, so from town to villages, which is like a 40-kilometer ride. Every day he used to do it 80 kilometers up and down. And back then there were no roads to speak of, so Rajdoot served him very well initially.
Very reliable.
Very reliable.
Yeah, but like most Indian bikes those days, which was essentially Java and Enfield, getting the engine started, kick-started was an art.
Yeah. Absolutely. Rajdoot was notorious for a back kick, 2-stroke.
Worst was Enfield. It could break your leg. It was a 4-stroke.
Yeah, but if it was tuned properly, the CB points were tuned properly, you could start an Enfield with your hand even, right?
Yeah, that's why, the original brands, I'm talking about North India, is born and brought up in Delhi. Like you have Punjabi Dhaba all over, it's ubiquitous. It was half kickstart.
Yeah.
Half kickstart was a name used by a lot of mechanics.
Yeah.
To do what the factory hadn't, so. But my dad later migrated to the first of the hybrid Rajdoots. That's when the Japanese started showing interest in India, whether it was Suzuki for Maruti or with TVS. So at that time, this new bike, it had absolutely no starting problems. And later on, when I got my first job in advertising, I was an accountant before doing my CA. When I first joined, one of the first things, I knew nothing about advertising. I just studied marketing at IIM Cal, but I realized that what you study, in an MBA, very often has very little to do with real life when it comes. So one of the stories, the campaigns I did was to point out why, this whole thing, starting issues had been solved. And that's where I learned that the magic was the carburetor. It was a Mikuni, and in India they called it Mick Carb. Then not alternator, the magneto was Kokusan Denki. And the other thing that gets very fragile off-road is spokes. So the spokes also were swatch spokes, they're called. It's a special way of drawing the spokes, called Hoshi. So the Rajdoot already had this. They didn't talk about it. So the first campaign I did was to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, that it's not Polish, it's Japanese and it's made in India. So but it works.
Yeah.
So that campaign did extremely well, and sales of Rajdoot was not very popular in urban areas. Like when I was in Delhi University, the bike to have was a Java. And for something that we'll talk about later, sound. You know, the room, dum, 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 dum.
And it was quick for
its time. It was quick. And it had 4 gears.
Yeah.
And it had that trafficator clutch, if you remember. We talk about AMTs and all. But there, if you know, that if you lifted the lever up, it automatically engaged the clutch. Yeah. So that was, and it had a styling signature which was quite nice. Rajdoot was not a good looking.
Not very aspirational, not very desirable.
Yeah. And the other sound signature, another important thing was Enfield, of course. But only when ridden slow. So the whole joy of Enfield was the dhak, 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 dhak.
Because this is the old cast iron engine, long stroke engine.
And also see, most of the owners were not private, they were army and police.
Right.
Now, in rural areas in India, these are like role models of authority. And so the sound of the Bullet was the sound of authority, not just power.
The personality of the rider actually was the personality of the bike itself, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For the Royal Enfield
Absolutely.
Bullet. Yeah.
But a friend of mine, Prahlad Kakkar, when he made a movie for Enfield, it was done with a tabla, much like, and it just said dhak, 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 that sound of the Bullet, and it would meld into the tabla. Right. And it became famous. It was called Ye Bullet Meri Jaan.
Bullet Meri Jaan, yeah.
Ye bullet meri jaan, manzilon ka nishaan.
Now when they relaunched the new Bullet,
Right.
the current generation Bullet with the modern J-series engine, the whole campaign was around Bullet Meri Jaan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Ye bullet meri jaan, na 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 na.
Everything from T-shirts to, even if you see now in the Royal Enfield showrooms, Bullet Meri Jaan, you'll see hoarding and everything.
Only thing is, one thing would be, you know, in North India especially, right up till Maharashtra, I think no, all across India. When you're a figure of power, your mustaches go up, which I don't see much
anymore.
So, yeah.
So this was, what you're talking about is the pre-Indo-Jap collaborations, right?
Yeah, so like the Indo-Jap, see what happens is, much like EVs, the issue is ecosystem. For the Japanese, the ecosystem is their vendors. They're all specialized. So Hoshi for spokes, Mikuni for carburetors, and Kokusan Denki most people don't know about. But then these days you talk about Nippon Denso again, right, for air conditioning. So that infrastructure already common. It was all part of a long-term strategy on the point of Escorts. And the same thing pretty much happened between Suzuki and Maruti, right? But these three brands would also be part of the supply chain for other Japanese brands, like for instance, Bajaj tied up with Kawasaki.
Right, the
And
KB100.
Yeah. And then Hero, of course, tied up with Honda. So they brought in Munjal Showa for the suspension.
Right.
So the Japanese ecosystem of specialized vendors was already in place.
The supply chain was already in place.
Yeah. And automobile industry is largely about assembly.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I was growing up then when the first Indo-Jap bikes came out. I think the In Suzuki came out first, if I'm not mistaken.
100cc.
Yeah, 100cc.
Two-stroke.
Two-stroke. The In Suzuki came out first, then I think KB was the last one to come out.
KB100 was the first two-stroke motorcycle, and Bajaj was those days transiting away from scooters into bikes. I think that is when Rajiv Bajaj took over. And in fact, some of the people I worked with helped design Planet Bajaj, which was all about bikes. Yeah, so KB100, and but I think before KB100, CD100 was launched.
CD100
with that fillet shuttered.
Forget it, the famous.
Yeah. So that was the only four-stroke, and therefore fuel consumption was excellent. And the rest were two-strokes in different pecking orders.
Yes. But amongst all the two-strokes, in fact, I owned a Suzuki as well, much later in life, 100cc Suzuki. But amongst the Suzuki, talk about the In Suzuki in mid-80s.
AX100.
AX100, and the AX100R also came out subsequently with chrome fenders.
Okay.
And so amongst the in Suzukis, the KB100s, the RX actually set a different
Yeah.
niche as a performance motorcycle,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah, it did. But then, to be fair, RX100 was, to use a phrase, I used to work for Brook Pond, chota packet. The mold for the RX100 had already been set by the RD350.
Which came, in fact, before
Earlier.
the RX100.
Yeah, it came before any other bike.
Yeah.
It was the first Indo-Jap bike in the country.
Right.
And that kind of cast the mold for RX100.
Right. I think I was about 8-9 years old and I saw a blue RD350 in my hometown, and the first thing that struck me was the sound.
Yeah.
And the person was starting it up,
Absolutely.
kick-starting it, the sound and the tachometer needle revving. I still...
Absolutely.
remember it distinctly. So, were you involved in the whole when you had advised brands and particularly Yamaha Escorts?
So I was in an ad agency that time. Like I said, I knew very little about advertising, but I thought I knew everything about bikes. So at that time, with this new hybrid Indo-Jap Rajdoot being a pretty decent success, and ever since the fuel crisis, petrol and fuel, that mileage kitna deti hai is like, I think, part of the Indian language now. Emphasizing its mileage and its all that helped Rajdoot get some urban sales amongst commuters. The young people, of course, it was always Java. So that time the challenge asked was that, listen, we are now ready to, we've signed a collaboration with Yamaha. We did a corporate campaign which only showed the engine, didn't show the bike.
This was Escorts.
Escort. Yeah. So since they had tractor, motorcycle, cranes, JCB was one of the... So we did a corporate campaign about the Escorts as a brand and saying, look, here is low-level stuff, cheaper work, Rajdoot or Escort tractors or something, and high-level Ford tractors on one side and Yamaha bikes on the other. So a two-level strategy, so putting it. So at that time we were told that this is the engine, and I, of course, being a nut, I had already started from school days. I used to spend my entire pocket money on buying a magazine called Cycle. So I said, my God, this is Daytona. They said, oh, you know about this? I said, yeah, who doesn't and all? They said, a lot of people don't. So they said, look, the issue here is that Yamaha wants to test the waters of India with a minimum 5,000 bookings in the first year.
Right.
And a lot of people who book in those days.
This was around 82, 83?
It was 82.
82.
Yeah, 81 was when I conceived and launched this Rajdoot campaign. This was 82. So they said, look, will 5,000 buy it? Of course, I just wanted to make sure it was made so I could buy one, but I had to be a professional as well. So I said, we'll do some research, and so I got two bikes. One was a 400, which was a police bike, which was sold in Thailand.
Was this the LC 400 or
No,
air cooled?
the LC hadn't come in yet. There was a TZ, which was only for racing,
right,
with water-cooled heads or cylinders too. So without the stickers, we took the normal RD350, took the stickers off, and first we did research to know the awareness of the Yamaha name. Pretty much, nobody knew Yamaha.
Not even the enthusiast?
So I happened to bump into an enthusiast because we used to make ad films, a stunt rider.
Right.
He, of course, had used a Yamaha. Kind of a, not motocross, but you can say...
Dual sport.
Dual sportish kind of. It was damn good for stunts because it's light.
Right.
And there was another client, actually a supplier of Escorts, called George Maijo and Sons in Cochin. He used to sell Yamaha outboard motors for inland and coastal fishing.
Right.
So apart from these groups, the intended target group, which is bikers, they knew nothing about Yamaha, but everybody knew Honda. So that was the issue. So brand awareness is critical. The whole media industry is about creating awareness, whether through old days headlines, now clickbait. So we decided to go further, and the advantage is if somebody doesn't know a brand, is that there's no bias.
Right. There's no preconceived notions,
Nothing,
so to speak.
nothing. So they don't know the name. So you obviously now build the name with the product. So I started going to, I had a lot of friends. Some were motocrossers, some were track racers, and I was a nutcase myself. Only thing is we did illegal racing in Shantipat at night. One friend had a Triumph 650, one had a BSA twin, one had a Honda CB350 twin. So we had a network of enthusiasts. We kind of knew this is so. I went and took this bike and gave it to them to ride, and jaws dropped, literally, because a four-stroke twin like a Honda CB 360 it was, not 350. There was no comparison. It just blew everything apart. And as you know, Yamaha RD350 already done that to four-cylinder 750s in places like Daytona.
Yes, there was a famous print ad.
Yeah.
I remember there's a famous print ad about the RD350 smoking all the 750s of that time.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, TZ and RD, there's a reason. TZ is track and RD is race derived, which means derived for the road.
For a road. It's
For the
street
road.
bike.
Yeah, so that's the engineering nomenclature, but it holds the key. So when they gave that, and then, so before that we would ask them like, this bike will cost, I used a price of about 25,000. I was told 22, 23, so I said 25. They said, you're mad. Because a Premier Padmini was costing about 31,000 bucks.
So cost is almost as a car.
No, and also a car was a dream. It was what we call a rite of passage for an Indian.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, why? And a motorcycle was a symbol of poverty.
Yeah.
People who bought bikes were people who can't afford cars. Right? It was madness. So then we would check, see, they had come on a bike, so they knew how to bike, give them the key. When they came back, almost all of them said, look, this is not a 350 like we've seen. This has got nothing to do with an Enfield or something. And they said, how much will it cost? And that time, then again, they said, you said 25,000? I said, yeah. But a lot of them who had obviously the money said, when will you be launching it? So at that time, we did our extrapolation. And the report I gave to Escorts was that instead of 5,000, I was also had a vested interest. I wanted to be the first customer. I said, you'll get at least 15. Are you sure? And all. So anyway, I took them through. The decision was taken. And the bike launch date was set for October. Normally in India, what happens is the harvest and Diwali season is when customer offtake happens. So you'll see a lot of offers.
It was launched in October of 83.
Yeah. So June 83, I said, listen, now that there was a pitch for the account, we didn't get it. There was a lot of agencies. We thought it's ours, because we've done Rajdoot and all. But anyhow, I think the product knowledge and the fact that we understood the consumer better than anybody else, that tilted the scales in our favor. We got the account. I got 2 promotions immediately.
Wow.
So, anyway, and the first thing I did was land up at Escorts and said, now that I've done my work, I want my reward. So I bought the first RD350.
Really?
I was taken to the warehouse, pre-shipping warehouse. There were just 2 colors, red and blue. So I took a blue one. 1A1223 was the engine number, chassis number. Somebody from Escorts came, he was living in South Delhi. He took me past, gave the papers at the Badarpur checkpost because Haryana, Delhi cross.
Right.
And I was home on my bike and I didn't sleep that night because I just kept going to all my friends and so that was it. And
so I have one question for it. When the bike was launched, when the RD350 was launched in India in 83, as an 84 onwards it's picked up. And branding, since you're a brand person.
Sure.
So was it the Rajdoot lineage why it was named the Rajdoot RD350?
That was, I think, because of the joint venture politics. I'll be plain. In fact, I felt that putting the Rajdoot, because see, this is now getting into branding, if you'll excuse me. User profile, you are known by the company you keep. So if you're a user of the product, and I'm not talking about Amitabh Bachchan or the actual user you see on the roads, if that person is aspirational, it helps get the brands, it tilts the brands, it reduces the brand's price sensitivity. If my heroes are riding that bike, then obviously I need to. Everybody has a role model. So I don't know if that, so, but that Rajdoot thing was obviously a negative perception, because if Rajdoot is a Doodhwala's bike,
Right.
then you can't put that on a race bike.
Yeah.
But I guess, these are the politics of joint venture branding. So whether you call it Ind Suzuki or Kawasaki, Bajaj, Hero, Honda, none of the Indian names really had the stature of the Japanese partners. But then there was a law which did not allow the Japanese to own more than 27% of the equity.
Right.
And the whole objective was that working with the Japs, the Indian partners also would learn new skills and upgrade the products. Big vision. So I guess in the bigger picture, you didn't like it. Of course, there was a huge market, I want to tell you, of taking off the moment they bought it. They took off the Raj, you must have known, and you got Yamaha stickers. And yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah it puts it in.
Yeah. But then, right after it was launched, 83, end 83 it was launched, 84 it had a good run.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when, but I remember that movie which was Subhash Ghai's film, Jackie Shroff's debut film.
Hero.
Hero.
Yeah. That was in 84, mid 84.
84.
After that, at that time the bike had already pretty much
established.
Chha gayi thi,
Yeah.
as they say.
But that was putting that bike in the movie and a race inside the movie, a race sequence in the movie using the RD350 was a sort of a branding exercise unheard of in Indian cinema, right?
Yeah.
At that
it
time.
was done, it was coming in, and also television, independent television was no longer just Doordarshan. Doordarshan got from black and white to color.
Yeah.
So that was a big change in the media scene also in India.
Right.
So yeah, so that bike, I don't know if that bike, whether it's Mahendra Singh Dhoni for Citroen or whatever, the customer is somebody else, and user means actual user.
And the actual user of the RD350 was the enthusiast.
Absolutely.
He didn't care about fuel economy.
And also psychological divide.
Right.
He was not the guy with the handlebar moustache for whom dhak 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 was the sound of power.
He wanted speed, he wanted sound.
Yeah. So in fact, our job very often is to brief the creative people with a platform. So, Mach 1, Mach 2 kind of sound. So this was the sound of speed.
Right.
So, so in fact, the sound of the bike was, I think, the key magnet, because people knew from a long way off.
Good.
Just as they could identify
that
a
reed
bullet.
valve wind, that intake roar. Still music.
Yeah. So in fact, when I used to finish my racing at 2 in the morning, I had to go to office at 9. When I came home at night, my mom would be up, because we lived along a Nala and Defense Colony. So that sound would resonate through the Nala, and people knew he's coming, because there was no other Yamaha owner to recover. So I think that became a great thing, because while you're enjoying the speed and the pickup, the world outside, whether they're enjoying it or what, I don't know, but it was that something that stuck in their brains, the sound. And this, coming to the next thing, was what led to the RX100.
Yeah, but the RD also was ahead of its time in a way. It didn't do so well, and of course the detuning that happened, the low-end torque version was introduced.
See, one of the things I'd mentioned in my research, that the guys who are buying it don't give a damn about fuel consumption. For them, the CD100 is doing the job, 83 or whatever kilometers. These guys never even asked about the fuel consumption. It was so addictive. But then, companies have their own identities forged by their products.
And a business case also, right?
And a business case built on Rajdoot.
Right.
Where the whole thing is mileage. And Hero Honda is saying mileage. So hame bhi karna chahiye. So I protested wildly. They put the ARI figures of 38 kilometers. I said, listen, I've driven almost 8,000 kilometers on this bike. First your test bikes, then mine. I've never got more than 17. Delhi, Chandigarh, maybe 18, because the highway was good. The moment you get to Manali, 14. Right? In fact, the original Japanese bikes, I used to see 12. And that's the kind of fuel consumption that a Premier Padmini would give you if you drove it carefully. So I think that is what, and then they would listen to dealers. And the dealers would say, if this had this mileage, the sales would boom. And actually what happened was, fuel was starved. I use the word starved deliberately because the engine was tuned to make a certain bhp.
Lean into the...
That's a two-stroke. And don't forget, in a two-stroke, fuel, petrol and oil are
to be
premixed
premixed,
to go
yeah,
inside.
yeah.
So when you make that lean, then to get the lubrication, you tune the oil up. Now, if you put excessive oil, you're again robbing, you're not allowing the spark plug to combust as it should.
So it's
seizures
spark
happen.
plugs will
Yeah,
flop
but the
out.
guys who bought it because they were told it's 28 now, obviously they're trying to get the pickup. And when they're doing it, the engine's overheating because of fuel starvation, seizures happened. And that gave it a pretty bad name. And in fact, my next job was I was told that I will represent the company in front of the consumer forum where a lot of people complained, you advertise this much and you give this much and then the seizures. So that took about 6 months. And by that time, Escorts understood that these are two, one is what I call, is my phrase, there's a transport segment and there is a sport segment. For one, it's a compulsion to have a bike because you can't afford a car.
Right.
And for the other guy,
The enthusiast.
the enthusiast, he wouldn't want to drive a car.
Right. So 83 it was launched, end of 83 like you
Yeah,
said. And
October.
By the time the low end torque version came
Yeah.
out, it was late 80s.
85.
85 it came
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
85 it came
Yeah.
out and it ran until 89, 90? 19.
85, well, it did run, little bit before that. I think they stopped production because 85 Jan, the RX100 was launched. And that was, like you could say, the Buddhist middle path. I'll give you a sound somewhat like the RD350. It'll be cheaper,
Smaller compact
smaller
version.
compact bike would fit so many more frames.
Yes.
So at that time, and then Yamaha also shifted the assembly line away from the Rajdoot factory to a new factory in Noida, Surajpur,
Surajpur.
dedicated to their own this thing.
Right.
And they'd learnt their lessons. Everybody had learnt their lessons,
Yeah.
both Escorts and Yamaha, that there are now two markets. And the sport bike segment in India was born.
Yeah.
Right? The only thing is to get volumes to justify the production, you had to have a cheaper bike than the RD350.
I remember the print advertisements of that time of the RX100
Yeah.
ahead of the hundreds.
Yeah,
0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds.
absolutely.
So that really sets the tone
absolutely. For those people who couldn't afford an RD350, the RX100 was an automatic choice. Although there was a TVS Suzuki, there was a Kawasaki Bajaj,
yeah.
but honestly, since you've been riding bikes, you know there was no comparison. And fuel consumption also was, my dad got one, my brother bought one later.
It was in the mid 30s, I think, 34.
That's the best.
Yeah.
In fact, if you tried to emulate your RD350, you'd probably get about 25 or 24 or something. But it worked.
Yeah.
Because the segment was there. No?
And the distinctive sound also.
And, well, not quite RD350, but yet
compared to the
very
other
different from the TVS Suzuki and the KB100.
KB100s.
KB100, in fact, many people said sounds like an auto rickshaw.
Yeah, it didn't have a great sound.
Maybe because Bajaj used to make three-wheelers.
Yeah.
So that was a story, RX100. It did well. They had no problems. 100,000 sold. Because, see, the brand had already been built. The only thing is the brand was very clear. It's not in the transport segment. And this one was a slightly cheaper version. So
RX100 in fact did well till about the late 90s, right?
yeah, that's when the EPA,
emissions
things kicked in
killed,
and
two strokes were
dead,
gone. Yeah.
finished.
So after that, sort of Yamaha went downhill, at least in terms of
Yeah.
perception.
Absolutely.
The Enticer came in, which was like a mini Harley kind of a cruiser look, which
Yeah,
was
that's the four-stroke era.
Four-stroke
But
era.
before that, they did try, like RX became 135.
RXG came,
RXG came, right?
RX 135
Right,
came,
because your
RXZ came, RXZ came.
RXZ came. Yeah, these were all variations on a theme, but the story was clear. The two strokes are
Gone.
So this was a last dying attempt to leverage the plant and equipment and the tooling. It doesn't take much. I don't think those bikes were, and what I later in my research it showed that the 135 was not much faster than the original RX100.
Although I think the 135 came with two variants, 4-speed and a 5-speed both, right? If I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah. Even the RXGs initially came with a 5-speed, then they moved into a 4-speed gearbox.
I don't know because I had an RD350. Frankly, I don't care what happened to the rest of the world.
So you're sitting in the high horse, RD350 high horse.
I was in Chennai, and so that's where I got in touch with friends who said, MRF and Vijay Mallya, the United Breweries, they sponsor the Sholavram race. So from street racing to legal racing, that was a great magnet to go to Sholavram, took part in it and got the fastest lap time.
Wow.
And then somebody seduced me by saying, listen, if you wear this company, I don't want to take the name, an Indian tire company, it's Poncho on your number, you'll get free tires. So now I'd already done a few odd kilometers in my tires, and so I said, let me try. I put it on, and unfortunately it was after the practice session. The offer came because I had the fastest lap.
Right.
And when I put it on, lap 1, okay, lap 2, then after lap 2, there was a Kingfisher corner, so where you turn left, and then there is that chicane made of straw bales. As I took that corner, I slid, I went for an almighty slide. I was doing about 90 or something on that corner. And in an RD350, actually, it wasn't much of a problem. It was beautifully balanced. It wasn't just the power, it was beautiful.
Chassis was great.
Lovely.
It's like, yeah.
So I went sliding, and then later, because the whole thing was being covered by Doordarshan, later on, because we also advertise on Doordarshan, right? So I had some. So went and saw, and there were chunks of rubber coming off.
Yeah, but the Indian tire companies have really picked up now.
Well, I just went on another Indian company's thing. I took a Duke 390 to Lahore Spiti, and on those roads, I don't want to use those, but the original bike came with Metzealers.
Yeah.
And they are no longer imported. So, big problem. So, I guess one will have to take the best of what's available.
No, some of the tires right now.
I'll take your word for
it. Yeah, they're very good. You have companies like Vedestein, which is a Polo.
Yeah.
Then you have
TVS.
TVS Eurogrip.
Yeah.
Protoc Extremes are very good. Apollo also has H1s.
Yeah.
H1s.
Non-Bredenstein,
Yeah.
they've got a good
very good tires.
Yeah.
Then there's new brand called Rise Moto. They have just recently launched their Trace Rad radials for track use.
Right.
All.
The problem is for a KTM Duke 390 for that particular 17-inch rim. A lot of these companies are not yet making tires.
No, now they are.
Now they are. Okay.
Now they are.
I was in Himachal and I was told,
now they are.
2 mahina wait karo.
No, now you'll get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So since you are a brand expert as well, so your journey from the RD350 to the RX100, so what has been the brand perception or the brand journey of Yamaha in your view during this whole time to the 2000s, to the millennium?
See, for me it was a rite of passage. I was a two-wheeler nut from the beginning. I would pretend my first exposure with the Yamaha was, I was a captain of a university swimming team, and one of the second year guys, my first exposure to Yamaha, I was already pre-sold, was a 100cc bike with a horizontal engine called L2G or Y2G. He'd imported it from Nepal.
Step through.
No.
No.
It had a tank in front and with that original Yamaha tuning fork logo. When I rode it, I remember we used to go from South Delhi where we lived to National Stadium for a morning practice and then to Delhi University. So we used to take the Rajghat road because that's where every biker went.
Yeah.
We blew past everything, meaning Bullet, Java, we just blew past them. 4-speed gearbox, double riding. And that was 1974. So you can say in a way I was pre-sold to Yamaha. And then my friends who went and studied abroad came back with the Honda CB360 twins. Some had BSAs. I guarantee you, I would have taken them on even on that 100cc bike. It's not just because weight becomes a disadvantage.
Right.
And especially when you're cornering,
Right.
a smaller bike can sometimes have an advantage.
Right.
To make sure your cornering speed is high, your exit speed will be higher than the bigger bikes because either suspension is squatting and footrests are rubbing, etc. That race never happened, of course, but I was confident we could do that. So that was my first exposure. RD350, RX100, my dad and my brother bought one. Beyond that, I wasn't bothered with anything below a 350. For now, anything had to be better. And then sales dropped. Yamaha, the joint venture ended because the government rules changed. From 26%, now you were allowed 100% ownership. So all the spin-offs like Bajaj Kawasaki became an independent company.
Right.
Suzuki, I think didn't come in with two-wheelers, but they were already with Maruti. The two-wheeler entry came much later.
No, TVS and Suzuki were together for quite long.
For quite some, longer.
Yeah.
But their entry with re-entry after independence with bikes was
Much later. Suzuki came much later.
Right.
Correct.
Whereas Yamaha and Kawasaki, I think Yamaha was first of the block
First
to
of the
go
block.
100% eco. And that's the time when the emission norms started coming in. It was the end of the two-stroke. And it was then, by going independent, I think Hero Honda, because it's a country where mileage matters, sales obviously rocketed, and Rajdoot and people like that, Java, were all now legacy, finished.
Yeah.
The only thing that kept going was Enfield. And like I said, they had institutional sales, police, armed forces, etc. But otherwise, it was all over. And so Yamaha wanted to play the volume game and started bringing out Yamaha versions, not Yamaha versions, but their take on fuel-efficient bikes.
Yamaha
Crux. Then a slightly stylish one called
Enticer,
like a cruiser. And Enfield also had something with
Thunderbird.
Easy Rider. You know, everybody was doing their Harley Davidson version. Poor man's Harley. And that time then sales started dropping. Kept declining. By that time I was on my own. I set up M Brand, my company.
Yeah. But then they were still the Yamaha loyalists, right?
100%. So when I was asked, the usual thing is, you know, wherever I go, whenever I say M Brand, the first thing that comes is, we need an ad campaign. When you tell them that, listen, I have to explain, user experience branding is what created Yamaha in the first place. There was no advertising.
Right. User experience is what created the Yamaha.
Critical. Advertising and media is in viewer experiences, the business of clickbait. And since you're a biker, you know that clickbait is not a substitute for clicking through the gearbox.
So is it accurate to say, or reasonably accurate to say, that Yamaha's brand equity in India was primarily user experience?
Absolutely.
What established?
The brand name was not known.
Yeah.
It was that product's user experience that, you know, made it was addictive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And very few brands, I think, have been able to match that addiction even till today.
Correct.
So when I was called, I said, look, this is what I do. There were some Escorts people who joined Yamaha. And as normal, I said, I first want to gauge the user experience. So I went to, by that time I'd learned that North India is not really an enthusiast market. I hope I'm wrong, but it's not. Most of your enthusiasts, whether you call them
South.
petrol, all west, you can say from Maharashtra southwards, right? And
Pune, Bangalore.
Bangalore,
Chennai.
Coimbatore is a big place, more than Chennai.
Yeah.
And also the best mechanics, I swear.
Even Kerala to some extent, right?
My experience is Coimbatore, because when the two-strokes were banned, one of the things I discovered, a lot of kids were buying RX100s and RD350s, taking them to Coimbatore, where this guy would somehow get parts from Malaysia, fit them with disc brakes, alloy wheels, suspension, piston, cylinder, car, you know, everything, the works. Brilliant jobs. And the bike, the used bike price plus the cost of modifications was more than the price of new bikes being sold by rivals. So that, I think, is the definition of addiction. And this was a second generation. So if RX100 was launched in 1985, Jan, and this research I did in 2004.
Almost
That's
20
a generation.
20 years later.
Yeah. And a lot of them said, my dad had a 350, my uncle had this thing and that. It was bizarre. I mean, whether it was legal or not, I have no idea how they got registration, but you know, India. So that's the time when I discovered that two things that stuck out. One, India was becoming affluent. Two, most of the affluence was, I think, willy-nilly catalyzed by the IT sector, jobs, whether they're call center or anything above.
Or ITES as this called.
ITES, yeah. So Secunderabad, or it's called Cyberabad, I think, also had started getting campuses of IT companies. Bangalore, definitely. The market, the bulk of the market was there. And everywhere, and I do in-depth discussions with mechanics, because the user experience is also, after you buy it, it's driven by the mechanic. Right? It's a durable, it's not a packet of surf. So so consumer durable branding also, is very different from what branding meant when FMCG products Lux, soap, surf. It's a totally different ball game,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you measure the user experience of surf? It's all Lux or whatever. So that's what it is. All of them wanted, they all understood, they were educated people. All of them understood, two-stroke to nahi aayega. It has to be a four-stroke. Can't you do something to bring the four-stroke equivalent of these bikes? And sorry to say, I mean, I don't want to use the words they use to describe the crooks and enticer and all that. This is not Yamaha. If this is what you want,
So this feedback you actually gave to the Yamaha dealership.
I've got it on record. I've got it on record. I video recorded everything.
So how long did it take for a turnaround from enticer to a crux
so
to
2 months it took.
Yeah.
And one thing I know about branding, especially that area of positioning, how to differentiate yourself from competitors. It's not about what you must do. It's also what you must not do, never do.
Right.
So the first thing was, unequivocally, all your four-stroke bikes, people are saying, if you're playing the mileage game, I might as well buy a Hero Honda.
Correct.
Right? Milta hai. And the excitement of the Yamaha that is missing, your bikes are not giving. So your Ryzen the R3 is gone.
Yeah.
So that I think that was understood clearly because I played clips. In fact, women from Pune, they said the day a new RX100 comes, I'm going to get rid of my scooter. And females were those days primary buyers of automatic transmission scooters like I think Kinetic Honda, yeah, Active Ad. So I said even female bikers, right? There's a new strata of female bikers. Yeah, so that was the feedback. And what was agreed upon was that the closest thing, the spiritual successor of RD350 was the YZF R1. Stratospheric price. But then, sometimes to get your credibility of your brand back, you have to bring what is called a halo product. For instance, Porsche, no matter that most of its sales have been Cayenne, still makes a 911.
Yeah.
That's
the hero product.
That's the halo. That is inside. That is the one that first created your DNA.
Yeah.
It was about 12 lakhs. It was a CBU. There was no way volumes. So the idea was, again referring to Brook Bond's Chota packet of chai, red label, is to slice off from the four-cylinder, first a two-cylinder, because a two-cylinder four-stroke would somehow approximate the sound of a single-cylinder two-stroke like an RX100, somehow. And Yamaha, is also, don't forget, they have an advantage. They're very creative guys. The original business was making musical instruments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when it comes to creating sound, you can actually blend two sets of creative people together. So that was it. And but then the costing came to around 3 lakhs, which that time was prohibitive. Even Korean brands like Hyosung had entered with water-cooled bikes and all. It was prohibitive. So much as I was disappointed, the decision taken was to one-cylinder bike, 150cc. Even that, they said, would cost close to 1 lakh. And at that time, CBZ, which was, I think, the primary competitor, and maybe Charisma to some extent, and then this Hyosung bike.
Comet.
These were our benchmarks.
Yeah.
And obviously, Yamaha couldn't be had to be the benchmark itself. So 150cc bike, so now you can't get the sound. So the idea was compensation should come from the styling. So YZF R1 was...
The styling was taken from there.
Absolutely. In fact, what we said was have the family appeal so that you can identify the Yamaha. It doesn't matter whether it's R15 or 30 or... They should look like
a Yamaha.
Chota bhai. Yeah, that's the... So that was agreed.
Like the RX100 was to the RD350.
Absolutely. Yeah. Except one exhaust pipe instead of two and various other things. So that was agreed in principle. Quick. Will somebody buy a 1,05,000 rupee 150cc bike when there is a Charisma?
For 72, 73.
And it was also bigger in cc, I think
223 cc.
223 cc. Yeah. CBZ at 150. I said the only thing is do what the RD350 did. That showed that there is a difference between an Enfield 350. Every cc of an Enfield and every cc of a Yamaha, there is no comparison. They're different. Do that. So the decision was taken that liquid cooling will obviously have to be done. Otherwise, there is no way you can get that thermal efficiency in heating. So that was done, and
Higher revving engine.
higher revving engine. But like I said, styling as a compensation for sound. R3.
Because you can't obviously replicate the two-stroke
No way.
to
No
a
way.
four-stroke
No
single
way.
to
No
a
way.
150cc.
Absolutely not. No matter even if Yamaha's saxophone makers get into the thing. So that was done. It was pretty much a runaway success. There was no advertising. I went back abroad. I had come back. I was working abroad. I had come back only for this assignment. And 2 years later, one of my assistants called me and said the bike's launched, and there was no advertising.
So from concept, was it conceptualized in India? Was it conceptualized in
It was made. It was conceived in India, made for India.
Right.
And since the brief was YZF R1 is the flagship, bring it as a magnet in the showroom, even though maybe you'll have 200 people buying it. Your credibility is restored, because the other credibility issue was, is this still the Yamaha of the Rajdoot era? Right? For the crooks and enticer. I said, you have to blow that thing, those cobwebs away.
So brand perception again was on an upswing.
And the only thing was, we said the other thing is, since it is RD350 had its track DNA. TZ pretty much ruled the track. So was YZF R1, especially the crossplane crankshaft one. So bring the styling, but get the RD300. And then in our product roadmap, we also had shown a scooter, saying that if the YZF R150 works, it might not make Yamaha loyalists happy as much, but the scooter definitely will kill the other scooters. If you have a liquid cooled scooter with 150cc.
Aerox.
But the time lapse is too great. And somehow I feel that at least in India, Yamaha's not keeping up the pace. That is required.
Also, the Aerox is a great scooter, fun to ride and everything, but the ride quality for Indian roads, it's a little stiff. Comfort factor, practicality is not there. It's an enthusiast scooter.
So I don't know why this happens. I've lost touch with them, but I do. They launched the R3 later.
R3 came before Aerox, if I remember correctly.
It did. For some reason, it lasted 2-3 years, and then it kind of faded away. I don't know why. And now then it's been relaunched, but it's a CBU, so prices are pretty high. And now I think Indian brands have also kind of upped their game.
Absolutely.
Which wasn't there at the time when the Japanese came. They've upped their game substantially.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And Bajaj, I think, would be... Can we talk about Bajaj?
Yes, we can talk about.
I think the brilliant thing is that Indian companies like Bajaj and many others, I think have figured out that underneath the love of Japanese brands and their success is something cultural called quality, attention to detail. German culture, which was the other one to do this, somehow seems to have
trickled down to him.
And I think I would blame the EV revolution more than anything else. Less moving parts, less need for machining skills and precision and things like that. Maybe. But Bajaj, by the reception I've been reading, the KTM always was a great bike. I'm riding one now, 392. But the reception for the Triumph abroad, and everywhere I see the people abroad saying, and I believe it's made in India. So will it be like something made in China? So, there is a pedestal where India and China stand. But I'm actually great that people are comparing India to China, because that's no longer a bad benchmark anymore. In fact, when it comes to electric vehicles, the benchmark to me is no longer Tesla, it's BYD. And now Xiaomi.
Yeah, it is China.
So I think that's a fantastic thing. If you can do quality manufacturing, then all you need is innovation and design, which hopefully Bajaj will...
I think it's across the board actually, not just limited to Bajaj now.
No, I think Enfield also, with the new LC, that Himalayan, the LC, the engine I think is the center
even
point.
the 350, the J series is a leaps and bounds.
That's still air cooled, right?
Air cooled.
Yeah. No, but liquid cooled is critical.
Yeah.
Because emission regulations in European markets and all will be so stiff. it'll be tough to...
Every year there's a new
Absolutely.
thing coming
So
out.
LC gives you that bandwidth.
No, in terms of the engineering landscape in the two-wheeler ecosystem in India, name it, they're absolutely right up there with the very best. TVS, they have the tie-up with BMW.
Yeah.
Bajaj KTM, Bajaj Triumph.
Yeah.
Royal Enfield is growing like how,
Sure,
and
sure.
I've talked to the best journalists from Europe, best motorcycle journalists.
Yeah.
Even they are like very impressed with the products that the Royal Enfield is bringing out now.
So once the quality benchmark for made in India is established in bikes, I think that's it's a great turning point.
Right.
Point is, where do you go next? So instead of making other people's brands, so I have this problem with Make in India that Make in India should be about creating your own apple orchard, not turning the screws on somebody else's apple. So I think that's the next big step. So will TVS, for instance, take a leap out away from BMW? Will Bajaj, and I think there the innovation, once the engineering is given, the innovation then lies in product design. And here also, I've seen one thing, I don't know if it's called Surge, S-U-R-G-E.
Surge.
You've heard of it? It won a design award.
Yeah.
It's a scooter that can be plugged to become a
Heroes made it.
So,
that's innovation.
That's innovation, and I happened to see it first in a design studio right here, close by, in Manesar. And I'm very happy that these are 4 designers, young Indians, who studied in Milan, automotive design.
Right.
So I'm glad to see that innovation coming.
Right.
If that innovation can come first to get Indians rid of their addiction to foreign brands, and then you can actually open up, which is what happened to YZF R15. The day it succeeded in India, Malaysia, Thailand,
Indonesia,
immediate. All the dealers said was, listen, when are you bringing it? Full stop. So if it works in India, it'll work in Asia. These are the booming economies today. This is the future. So while it's good to satisfy European and American riders with Indian products, I think at the end of the day, the future lies
home,
east of the Suez Canal.
So when you talk about the Indian two-wheeler industry or motorcycle and scooter industry right now, you have great products over the past 10, 15 odd years. We've seen the engineering really grow like that. Like the quality levels have gone up, the technological prowess has gone up. Even in the EV landscape, we have brands like Ather doing great stuff. Ultraviolet, fantastic motorcycle they've made. So where does the future of, and of course India is now the biggest two-wheeler market in the world, it's overtaken China also. So what is your view of the brand landscape or the manufacturing landscape or the segment landscape? Will EVs take over the ICEs, or will ICEs be here to stay for some time at least, for purists like us?
I just finished a project for a company that had purchased a legacy brand name. I don't want to take the name. And were entering, it used to make scooters at one time. Died. The brand's been bought, launching their own EV scooters. If you're talking about EVs in general, I would say all you have to do is look at the rollback rate. People who bought EVs and are now going back to ICEs. The problem is the ecosystem. The ICE guy has been weaned in an era where the ecosystem was, you never had to, if your petrol tank is showing close to
just
E,
go
to Indian Oil nahi to Bharat Petroleum, wherever. The problem is with EVs. Number 2. In urban areas, all of us are now living in high-rise. How do you charge? Right? Let's say you say basements. Okay, like Bombay, you have floods. Now, electricity, if I remember my basics, and water are not very good friends. Correct? So, the whole ecosystem is one of the issues. The other thing is Indian EVs in particular, and in fact even Western. I think in battery technology, China is, specifically BYD, and maybe little less CATL, are way ahead of the curve. Will the West ever catch up? I don't know. Will India ever catch up? I have no idea. I think the critical thing that I've got a video of this, I'll share with you. R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP, right? India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal are almost at par, below 1%. China and the US, percentage of GDP, even the GDP base is bigger, is close to 2%. So double the expenditure on R&D. And R&D is essentially knowledge. Without knowledge, how can you get innovation? So that, I think, is India's challenge.
So for purists like us, the internal combustion engine motorcycles will remain in your view?
It will come, but I think one must thank possibly the Buddhist culture. Gautam Buddha always said there's a middle path. So the Japanese companies, I would say, are very astute. People accuse them of being slow, but I think they're sure. Hybrids seem to be the best way forward. Kawasaki's already showcased it's this 500cc, I think, with a hybrid setup.
Yeah.
And they're saying it will match the performance of a 650, that Versus or whatever you want to call it. I think until the ecosystem comes, this is the only way forward, at least for India, for the next 5 to 6 years. Right?
Right.
How well will it be? Charging stations come. I'll give you a simple example. During COVID, I got police permission to drive my V-Cross from Goa to where my dad lives, Bhiwadi. I passed 21 FASTags. 7 didn't work. Right? And the blame was me. Aapka windscreen ganda hai, aapka ye. So if the FASTag before it worked and the FASTag after that worked, then it can't be my fault. So issue here is that infrastructure, highways are there. And it reminds me of an old ad done for Goodyear. What did it say? The tires are here, the cars are coming. So apply that analogy, the roads are here, but that infrastructure of the roads, whether it's toll tax, FASTag, whether it's done through GPS, which is the new move that's coming, I think that is lagging behind. And until that happens, you won't have a clear, even playing field to match a matching EV against an ICE, purely for utilitarian purposes.
Right.
The excitement, the internal combustion engine is now more than 100 years old. Although electric motors have been in existence for a long time.
Appliances.
Yeah. The battery tech plus the motor, I think getting into what I call the sensory appeal of people addicted to ICEs, whether it's sound, pickup, even vibration, sometimes people find to be a positive, right? So to match that, maybe we'll have to wait for a new generation that hasn't experienced the ICE and for whom, they were born with EVs.
Right. So that is when the...
That's if you ask me, because I study consumer behavior, which is critical for helping clients predict what will happen and what's bad, what's wrong. This is the way I've seen, catch them young. And this is precisely what I mentioned to this company which is making EVs. Your target should be a 16 to 17-year-old because that's the age when they go for their license, right? If you can get that person, you've got at least one generation in the future covered. But now the thing is, in the startup culture, it's all about get-rich-quick scheme, get cash burn, then burn it. And then if it's not producing results, almost all the standalone EV companies, and I'm talking about Bajaj with Chetak, they've hedged their bets. Because Chetak is not what Bajaj survives on. It still survives on IC. Same thing with TVS, their scooter. iQube. It's their petrol scooter, which comes closest to the dominant player, which is Honda Activa. Right? So, if you're talking about a utility segment, the transport, the CD100 guy now coming into Honda Activa, I think they've done a very brilliant thing by giving swappable batteries. That's the only way out. If that can give you a 100-kilometer range, then the favorite phrase, use case. Well, it will help people whose operating cycle is there. But for the pleasure seeker for whom touring is important, like I'd love to go to Manali at a drop of a hat, and you would probably like to go, maybe Goa. I think that is going to be a challenge. So the automobile, be it EV or ICE with restrictions coming, I think is the new tobacco. Personal transportation. Because all over the world, urban planners are pushing MRT system, mass rapid transit, Bombay, everybody else, is to why do you need a personal vehicle? Singapore, for instance, has 100% duty because they've given such a brilliant MRT system. They're asking people why
Prohibitively expensive to own one.
that's a penalty and it's going to roll out. And plus, if you read about Saudi Arabia's new city, the concept today is the 15-minute city. Education, shopping, work, home, everything within a radius of 15 minutes. So if that is the future of urban planning, I think your guess is as good as mine that the personal vehicle may itself, regardless of whether it's EV or CNG or whatever, I think politicians are pushing it into a kind of a, what is it called, Jurassic Park?
Well, I do hope for yours and my sake
Yeah.
we get to ride a few more
Yeah.
petrol-powered motorcycles before it's time to hang up our riding boots.
I certainly hope so because my experiences with EVs haven't been very encouraging. I just can't hack it. It's,
Okay. Thank you so much on that note, Manoj, for joining us and
Yeah,
giving
wonderful.
your insights and the lovely stories about Yamaha and motorcycling in general.
yeah.
If you've got any questions, do leave a comment and we'll get right back at you. And if you have any questions about the Yamaha story in India, do leave a comment as well. We'll get Manoj to reply to you as well about the whole Yamaha story in India. Thank you so much.